And what types of clients usually ask about prenuptial agreements?
I would say that I most often see.
Are there any stark benefits or things that you've seen that have really benefited your clients when it comes to having a prenuptial agreement?
Yeah, having a prenup in place allows you to.
My name is Katie VanDeusen, and we're here for the Illinois Family Law Podcast. I'm the managing partner at Sterling Hughes, and today I have Senior Associate Ryan Shope joining me to talk about prenuptial agreements. Thanks for joining us today, Ryan.
Yes, I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So let's start off first with an easy question, Ryan. So, what exactly is a prenuptial agreement?
So, a prenuptial agreement is a contract that you enter into with your soon to be spouse that allows the two of you to decide in the event of a divorce how marital property is going to be divided between the two of you, as opposed to letting the judge and the law decide.
And what types of clients usually ask about prenuptial agreements? Is this something that, you see maybe higher asset estates and individuals who are high wage earners? Are they the ones that are asking for these? Or are you seeing any type of shift recently in your practice?
I would say that I most often see people coming to me for prenups who have a fairly large estate or make a fairly large amount of money, just because they're wanting to protect what they already have in their name going into the marriage.
Okay. And then have you ever experienced or seen second marriages or third marriages and those individuals coming around and asking about these? Because that's been my experience as well, is that, those types of people will sometimes ask about a prenup and what that entails.
Yeah, definitely people who have been through the process before and been burned before will often come looking for prenups as well.
Definitely. And so that kind of segues into why have one? Are there any stark benefits or things that you've seen that have really benefited your clients when it comes to having a prenuptial agreement?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, having a prenup in place allows you to reject kind of how the law and the courts look at division of marital property in a divorce case and gives you more control over that situation. It allows you to have less litigation in the divorce process because of the fact that you've, proactively addressed those issues. Typically, you're going to see a lot less in attorney's fees on both sides with less litigation, and it just really streamlines the divorce process in general.
And in terms of like what you can limit, like I know you mentioned asset division, and you can kind of be creative with how you want to approach that. And you don't have to be bound by the terms of the law or how a judge might view things. But in that same vein, have you seen prenuptial agreements kind of limit spousal support or maintenance? Because that's another, I think, big area where providing clarity to people prior to getting married, and if you were to end up getting divorced, might be a huge benefit to the right parties.
Yep, I definitely see frequently people wanting to put provisions in prenups about limiting maintenance or spousal support. In the event of a divorce in Illinois, maintenance is very formula based. And so, what you see in prenups a lot is people either barring their spouses from seeking maintenance or putting forth some sort of other guidelines that they come up with and they find to be reasonable regarding what maintenance or spousal support might look like in the event of a divorce.
Yeah, I remember one prenuptial agreement I had, Ryan, where they wanted to put in certain thresholds, if they were married from 0 to 5 years or 5 to 10 years, or even, 10 to 15 years or 20 plus years. These are what the maintenance awards would be under each one of those set thresholds. So it kind of creates that clarity for both parties going in exactly what that maintenance would look like. And I've also seen prenuptial agreements where they've almost put in like a percentage of income, almost very similar to how the formula works currently, but coming up with a different set percentage. percentage. And then, like you said, or potentially just completely barring it, or having neither party be, neither party can even ask for that at a certain time. When you see that, are you taking extra effort, or is there an extra effort on your part as an attorney to kind of really talk to the client about what that impact is? Because if they're signing something that forever waives that right that they potentially would have under the law, like what type of a conversation are you having with the client with regard to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I always make sure to talk through with the client exactly how the law works if a prenup is not in place. So I make sure they understand what maintenance would look like and what they would be entitled to in the event that we're not including a provision with respect to that in a prenup.
It's so smart to do that, Ryan. And the other thing too that I've seen is some parties just reserve it. They're like, you know what? We don't want to have this battle now. We can't agree that neither one of us is going to have this as an available right moving forward. And we also can't agree to set terms now with those thresholds I referenced. So sometimes people are like, we're going to reserve this and let the divorce court decide at that time, or the divorce judge decide. So I've also seen that. How frequently do you see those types of reservations where it's not granted to them necessarily, but it's also not waived forever?
To be honest with you, I don't think I've ever seen that. Typically, my clients want to limit maintenance or waive it altogether in some capacity. But one thing I will say that I've seen people do as well is limit the scenarios where a spouse could potentially be entitled to maintenance. So, for example, they would say, neither spouse is going to be entitled to maintenance unless during the marriage the spouse becomes, disabled or sick and is not able to work, or if the parties end up having children together and they decide as a family that one spouse is going to become a stay-at-home parent, things like that.
Definitely. And then the next question that always comes up that I feel like people are just curious about is, do you have any examples of cases where a prenuptial agreement would have really helped, but it wasn't in place?
I would just say every case that I've had that was contested where the parties were not in agreement on how they want to divide up the marital estate is a case that would have benefited from having a prenup in place.
I could not agree more. I mean, a lot of times people may view prenuptial agreements skeptically, or like, why would I need to have this? I'm never getting divorced. But the reality is, you never think that's going to be your future. So the prenuptial agreement is there to be a safeguard and to have that roadmap as to what will happen. So it's tough because I do think a lot of people view these skeptically, but man, if they existed, it would really streamline a lot of litigation, in my opinion. So in terms of topics that you can include, I know there are certain things in prenuptial agreements that you can include, and there are certain things you cannot include. So let's talk about those for everybody who's listening. So what are some things that you can include?
So some things you can include, like we talked about, is provisions regarding limiting maintenance or spousal support. Another thing is going to be limiting the creation of marital property and or marital debts. I think one thing people typically don't realize is in Illinois, all property that's acquired by either spouse during the marriage is considered marital property, regardless of whether it's jointly held or whether you keep it in your individual name. So having a prenup in place can allow you to kind of work around those things when that's something that people don't typically realize going into it.
Agreed. Or like I had a prenuptial agreement once where one of the parties had a business and they really wanted to not muddy the water with regard to that business. And I think that the way that our statute treats income and assets, it presumes everything is marital. And so when it comes to a business, or, even mixing marital things in with non-marital things, can kind of create this really, I think, complicated and muddy situation. So a prenup can also, I think, really help provide clarity in those situations where, hey, we're not going to be fighting about contribution or reimbursement. Can you give an example, Ryan, of like where contribution or reimbursement would come into play and why maybe a prenuptial agreement could help avoid any type of pitfalls or just negative effects from those types of arguments in the future?
Yeah, so say you have a house that you own in your name prior to getting married, and during the marriage, your spouse is contributing maybe to the mortgage or contributing significant funds to renovations on the house. While that house is technically going to be considered a non marital asset of yours because of the fact that it has remained in your individual name and it was purchased prior to the marriage, your spouse can potentially seek reimbursement for those marital funds that were put into your non marital property.
And how many cases, Ryan, like, do you feel like it's a significant number of litigation based cases that you see that deal with either, contribution and reimbursement claims, maybe marital waste claims? I feel like those are recurring themes in some of the highly litigious case files that we see.
Absolutely. I see those types of claims all the time.
Yep. Now, give us some examples, Ryan, of what can't be included. What can you not include in a prenuptial agreement?
So the biggest thing is going to be any provisions with respect to potential future children that you and your spouse have together. So whether that's going to be parenting time or child support, those are not going to be enforceable provisions if you were to try and include guidelines surrounding those things in a prenup. Those are going to be things that have to be determined at the time of divorce and will be determined based on the best interests of the children.
Got it. Okay. So anything related to a child or children, whether it's decision making, parenting time, child support, financial support for that child, that is all, cannot be touched on, correct?
Correct.
Got it. Okay. So avoid those pitfalls. And then what do you really need to ensure that a prenuptial agreement is enforceable? Can those be challenged? Are they just written and set in stone? What does that look like?
Yeah, so some of the things that I definitely recommend that you do to make sure that your prenup is going to be enforceable is number one, both sides have to engage in full disclosure of, all assets, liabilities, and income that exist prior to entering into the prenup. So if there wasn't that full and accurate disclosure, that's something that a party could use to challenge enforceability. Another thing is going to be I highly, highly recommend that both sides have legal representation and obtain legal advice with regard to the prenup prior to entering into that agreement. And then another thing is going to be making sure that there's proper execution of the prenup. So you're going to want to have two witnesses with the signatures and have those signatures notarized as well. And then finally, I would say as well, the proximity of the timing of the signing to your date of marriage. So the closer it is to your date of marriage that you guys are executing the prenup, the more likely it's going to be that one spouse could argue that they were forced or coerced into signing a prenup. And if that's the case, then the prenup is going to be found to be unenforceable. So you definitely want to execute a prenup as far in advance as possible from your wedding date.
Oh, yeah. We've all, I think, experienced those potential clients that call and say, I'm getting married in a week. Can you help me with a prenup? And it's like, no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
I wish I could, but I just can't. Is there any like special time frame or rule with regard to what you would recommend as what's too late to start discussing or negotiating a prenuptial agreement?
There's no hard and fast rule with respect to when a prenup needs to be executed. I would just recommend, like I said, you get that process started as early as possible. And I would, as a rule of thumb, use a 30-day window prior to your wedding date as kind of, like I said, a rule of thumb. But again, there's no hard and fast rule with respect to that.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for joining me today, Ryan, and talking through prenuptial agreements. I appreciate it. And I feel like this really provided clarity as to why you should even get a prenup. And it really is meant to be a roadmap to simplify and streamline anything that happens in the future. It's almost like our insurance policy. So thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it. Bye, Ryan.
Bye.
Prenups can protect you from these financial battles, but what happens when you don't have one? Most Illinois couples have no idea which money issues will destroy their divorce settlement until they are already in court fighting over them. These disputes cost thousands in attorney's fees and can drag your case out for months. See what catches couples off guard in our next video.